What's up, Ethan?
What's going on, man? Do we tell people we've been sitting here talking for 20 minutes or no? Is that a secret?
What are they up to?
Yeah.
No.
Big things in the works.
Yeah, well, it's great to be here. Great to see you. Happy Friday.
I imagine it is pretty great to see me.
It is. This is always a highlight of my week. Well, it's also because I plan my week so that Fridays. Well, I think Friday is like your day off. I think you said at some point. No, it is.
Yeah,
okay.
It's supposed to be. Can we start here for a second? I know we just created this whole like elaborate plan of where we're going to start, but I got to tell you, man, I'm glad we're here. This is one of the most fun things I do every week.
Me too.
But I woke up. I've been pissed off all day. And I don't even know why.
Oh, you're not the pissed off type either.
I'm not. But you know what it is? It's like I don't get pissed off. But every once in a while, you tell me if you've probably experienced this too. I think part of it is like just too much energy with no outlet some days, or like too much to do or whatever. But there are some days that I wake up and everything's fine. And then by the time I get to work, I'm just pissed off about everything. And I don't know what it was. Like today, I just woke up, took my dog for a walk. It was a pretty chill walk. But I'm listening to a book while we're walking, and I'm kind of planning my day. And by the time I get back to my desk, I was just like not happy with anything, which is not, there's no reasonable reason for that to happen because I live a pretty great life. And today is a beautiful day. I don't know if anybody can tell if you're not watching the video. It's gorgeous here.
Mm-hmm.
But the reason I mention it is because I have a process that I go through, and I in order to kind of like get out of it, and sometimes it works, sometimes it doesn't. But I was just curious, like, have you ever had this happen where you just like for whatever reason you just get to your desk and you're like, "Fuck this," just fuck this day for some reason?
Yes, of course I do, all the time. I'm like
every day.
Yeah. I'm generally a very I don't want to say I'm an angry person, but I'm like there's like a boiled up rage inside of me. Yeah, definitely.
Yeah. I think maybe that's what it is. It's like intensity. And actually, I was just having a conversation. I just went to lunch with my parents, and I literally had to stop myself because I was on my phone and I was working while I was on my phone. Like you said, Fridays are typically my day off, but I haven't taken a weekend in the last 6 months because we've just been juggling too much. And so there's a lot of solvable problems, things that I can fix by just being a little bit more clear in my scheduling. But I caught myself at lunch and I'm like, I'm supposed to be out with my parents and I'm sitting here on my phone. So I put my phone down and I told them, like, hey guys, I feel like I'm not really here right now. Sorry about that. And my mom asked, she goes, do you think your field like attracts people who have addiction tendencies, or do you think that's an outcome from the demands of your field? Like, do you think it attracts all sorts of people, and after a while you just turn into somebody who like becomes like a workaholic or whatever? And I thought that was an interesting question. I'm curious what your thoughts are, because I have my thoughts on it. But
I think it's both. I think the problem with what we do is that it's never finished.
Yeah.
So no matter what you do, it's just very difficult to close the book on it and brush your hands clean. Like when I would build houses as a kid, it was just so much easier to swing the final swing of the hammer for the day and just be like, okay, my work for the day is done. It's difficult to do that when the work is like constantly in your brain, because in a way there's the work, but then there's the thinking, and the thinking is hard to shut off because for some jobs, not all of them, you don't necessarily have to think in order to perform. It's just practice, it's muscle memory. But for our job, you have to, because the times when you do the best thinking is actually when you're like shut off, and so it's difficult because you need the two. Like you need to be able to have the rest, but that rest comes at the expense of like still sort of working in a way, because that's the best time for you to actually filter through all of like the thoughts and ideas and discover what it is that sucks, what's good, what sticks, and so what do you think? What's your opinion?
I agree with that. I hadn't thought about that angle before, but you're right. It is partly definitely due to the work and the kind of the nature of the work. I think the people who survive in this industry, as long as you and I have tend to be not addictive personalities, but have a high degree of intensity. Like
Yeah.
you kind of need to in order to do well. And then I think what we talked about was like what we talked about at the table was how do you transform that over time? Because I think when you're young, having the intensity can be really helpful
For
because
sure.
it sets you apart from other people who want an opportunity. But as you get older, there's a couple of issues with it. One, it's just naturally harder to maintain intensity or to be the most intense worker, right? Because you're
Mhm.
now all of a sudden you're competing against people who are 10 years younger than you. And that's like going to be a losing battle. So for your own sake, you kind of have to transform from intensity to some other advantage, which funny enough actually ties in with what we're talking about today
Yeah.
about becoming valuable. But the other thing is, I think that kind of constantly riding intensity is not really the way to go forward. Like it's very demanding on your health, on your happiness. And so we were talking about it as it applies to other fields, like like the medical field or something. And I said, I think the people who do the best in that field, who really get to the top, are the ones who are actually able to do that mental switch off, take the wins, take the losses, but ultimately like walk away from it at the end of the day because you need to be on top of your game the next day and you can't
Yeah.
just constantly be thinking about it.
Yeah. I agree. And I don't know what's better because I think about it sometimes and I think if I could give up this side of me that has cost me like just so much serenity and so many nights of sleep, like would I?
Mm.
There's a part of me, and we had a funny little story again before we started recording, and I was talking about how I used to be like an endurance runner, and it's the same thing. There's a side of me that I enjoy that knew no matter what, no matter how big you were or smart you were or how strong you were, like if zombies are coming and this is just a straight up survival to see like who can suffer the most, like I'm definitely gonna not get eaten. And like you're gonna get eaten. And so I wonder if there's yeah, it's like chicken or the egg. Am I intense because of the work I do, or am I good at the work because of this weird internal like drive to just see like how much I can suffer without breaking.
Mm.
It's like a fucked up thing, right?
I don't know if it is. It is, but also I totally get it. I mean, I'm kind of the same way. I mean, I like my favorite thing to do is trail run, and
Oh,
like I think one of the reasons that today was a little tough is I'm dealing with kind of like a Achilles injury, or not an injury, but I can't
brutal.
run
They
like I
really
want to.
nag.
Yeah, man. And so it's just too much energy built up from not really being able to go out and suffer on the trail the way that I like to.
That's why I bought a rowing machine. Seriously.
That's interesting.
Yeah,
I
I
may have to
really
think
mean
about
that.
that.
I really mean that.
It's interesting that you mentioned that concept, though. I hadn't thought about this, but the book that I am listening to, the one that I was listening to on my walk, is actually Ross Edgley. He has this book called The Art of Resilience. And have we talked about Ross before on the show?
No, never heard of them.
Okay. This guy needs to be way more famous. He's so fascinating. He's an athlete and he's an endurance athlete. And I would probably characterize him as an extreme endurance athlete. So the thing that he's done that I know him the most for is what they call the Great British Swim. It was a continuous staged swim all the way around Great Britain. He
Yeah,
swam for 157 days, 6 hours on, 6 hours off, six
yeah,
hours
I
on.
know who that guy is.
Nuts. But he's also done a whole bunch of things like he's pulled a car the length of a marathon. He's climbed up and down a rope the height of Everest in 24 hours. So it was like a 10-meter rope that he just went up and down and up and down, up and down until he had climbed the height of Mount Everest.
Why would you
But
do
he's
that?
also, a lot of times he does it to raise money for charity, but I think a lot of it comes back to what we're talking about here, which is like there's some kind of drive to just kind of prove that you can to yourself to some
Yeah,
extent once one of these
yeah.
ideas just kind of lodges in your head. But he's also a super successful like founder and creator, like media creator in his own right. And so it might be interesting to do a case study on him at some point. He helped build one of the largest supplement companies in the UK. So he's
Wow.
got like business chops too. But his book is all about this sort of this idea, what he calls like stoic sports science, which is what you're talking about. How there's actually like a benefit to putting yourself through some of these things. And there's a quote, which I'll butcher because I'm just kind of going off memory here, but basically it was to the effect of like, talent is important. And it was a finding from this scientific study. Basically said when it came to, I think, athletic performance, but it might have been like overall performance just in life. It was like athletic ability helps, and so does intelligence. But the thing that was able to compensate for both of those was resilience, just the ability to stick it out longer than whoever else you're competing against. So there's something to that. But real quick, just to kind of close the loop on it, the way that I kind of get through this, because I'm sure other people dealt with this too. This is what I try to do, and on my best days, this works. I sit down. When I realize that I'm pissed off, I write about it, and I sit down. You've heard that old saying, like, just write about what makes you mad, because there's like a lot of good inspiration there. So I'll sit down. Like as soon as I realize, I'm like, I'm just not going to be able to focus today if I don't get whatever this is off my mind. So I'll sit down and I'll just write like I'm pissed off because blah 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 blah, and just stream of conscious write until I start running out of things that I'm pissed off about, and then pause, take a beat, and there's like 2 follow-up steps. So first, I'll always kind of like write, okay, that's a lot. Now tell me something that's going well, right? Like reestablish gratitude for something, because like I said, I'm sitting here on a beautiful day in a safe country with like literally everything I could ever want at my fingertips, and I'm pissed off, right? Like, slow down. And then the second thing, once I've established everything I'm pissed off about, I'll kind of go through that list and just be like, okay, well, what are you going to do to change these things? Because a lot of times what I see in that list is a bunch of things that I haven't done. I haven't established boundaries around my days off. So I'm working on my days off and stuff like that. And so just really try to like establish the gratitude and then take ownership for what you can change about like what you've contributed to your own,
of course,
unhappiness.
Yeah, what's the part that you played in your own misery?
That's it. Yeah. So anyways, that's it's good to see you.
I'm glad you're working through it, man. Yeah, you need a day off. It's clear.
Yeah, that's all the time. But that's kind of like my standard operating procedure for days like this. But luckily, this landed on a Friday, which means we had this podcast, which is also a favorite way to just blow off some steam. So we were talking before we got on here about, well, actually, I just mentioned it a second ago, the medical profession. Your dad, paramedic, and has a podcast.
Well, now he does. It's a quick update to the listeners. When we called my dad out on the 16th, I think it was, I sent him the episode. I texted it to him. I was at the gym. I was like, yo, Pop, just so you know, Ethan and I were talking shit on you on our podcast because you didn't hit publish like you said you would. And 2 days later, I get a text from him. He's like, I fucking published it, Jeremy. You happy now? But what's really cool about this is for the last 3 days, he's been sending me screenshots of old paramedics that he's worked with. And even an old relationship that he lost. It was a friend that he lost because of, Trump and that whole divide of things. And someone that reached back out to him like, hey, I really miss our friendship. I'm sure like we can work things out. In total, it was like 4 or 5 people that reached out to him, and he sent me a couple of different screenshots of people that say like, hey, we really appreciate your work. I learned so much from you as a medic. Like, I'm just basically happy that you're around. And it took him just that one experience, and I think he only got like 20 something downloads from it, to realize what I've been trying to talk to him about for the last couple of years, that like for him and you and all the people listening to this, like your work matters, your experience matters. Like there's something that you have to contribute. And the biggest thing in your way is that last little step of hitting the publish button, right? Because everybody records stuff or writes stuff or draws stuff or makes stuff or like makes fucking soap or candles or whatever, but so few people actually put it out into the world and say like, hey, I made this. And it was really cool to see that mini case study with my father kind of come to life so quickly and so in a way that had so much meaning behind it. It's
Yeah,
cool, right?
that's awesome. Yeah.
Yeah.
Well, I told you I listened to it. It's great. I think he's got a really good conversational tone with the listener. You know, you and I talk to each other, which is cool. And every once in a while, I'll loop in everybody who's listening, right? Or what's the thing I say? For everybody listening,
Yep.
that you hate.
I don't hate it.
But honestly, this is not bullshit. When I was listening to him, I'm like, you know, this guy he could be the next, who are those guys who do like all the paleo stuff?
Oh yeah, those bros.
Well, they're just like, they're like established doctors, like Dr. Gundry, all these doctors that are out there who have these successful podcasts. I can't think of their name off the top of my head for whatever reason. But what they seem to have in common is that they're like established in their careers, deep enough in their careers that people like actually care about their opinion on things. And they're also able to have that conversational tone, which I think is difficult for a lot of people to pull off. So I liked it. I enjoyed it. Congrats, Mr. Stoddart, for publishing. If you're listening to this, cool. Way to go, man. That's cool. You said something that I think is important. I want to just touch on real quick, because last week we talked about this, or was it last week or maybe 2 weeks ago? We talked about Sahil Bloom. And as I was building the case study for that, I watched a bunch of interviews. I think I watched an interview he did with Nathan Barry. And in the interview, he's talking about the very first tweet that he ever wrote. So I guess for people who maybe didn't hear that episode, Sahil Bloom's this guy, built a huge Twitter audience, and he used to do 2 tweets per week, like a thread. Every couple of days he would do a thread, and they just became incredibly popular. And he said this thing in the interview where he said he was like writing his first thread, and he said something to the effect of like, I knew it was good and I knew it would help people, and so like I just decided to publish it. And if you watch him say that as a writer, I think it stands out a little bit, because what you said is so often true. Like, most people don't have the default belief that their writing is going to help somebody else.
For sure.
The default thought is like, what if people hate this?
Or nobody cares. I totally agree. What a cool way to look at it. I love the idea about default confidence, like you just said, because so many people put stuff out there and the first thing they think of is like, nobody cares about this, myself included. And as soon as you said that like really resonated with me. And I'm going to do like a mental exercise from now on to think like, this can help, even if it helps one person. You know, it's better to think that like this can help one person than it is to think that this isn't going to help anybody. So yeah, I really dig that.
Yeah, it stood out to me. Speaking of mental exercises, I think we should talk about something that we touched on last week, that you wrote about, something that I thought about all week long. I spent some time going through this. So last week, we were mid-conversation. Well, we were talking about it through the lens of a business owner, how to like raise your prices and really feel like you were worth what you were charging. And you said this thing that I haven't been able to get out of my head, which is, if you rigorously dedicate yourself to not just saying you're the best, but actually being the best at the one thing that matters, and like looking at it and measuring it, then the confidence builds itself. It's only when some part of you kind of knows that you're not keeping your eye on that ball, that you're forced to sort of compensate with all these other types of maybe like self-created confidence. And that was a great conversation. You ended up writing a whole piece about it, which I want to get into. But the reason I say like we should transition into this based on what you said about an exercise is because I took that and I actually did an exercise. So last week I said this idea of imposter syndrome is something that I think we all experience. Certainly something I experience, because I feel like I've in some ways stumbled into this position at a very well-known publication, doing incredibly cool work with very cool people. And so I think about that all the time. Imposter syndrome. Do I deserve to be here? Blah, blah, blah. So last week after our conversation, my big takeaway was like, you got to figure out what's that thing that really matters, and then go look at it and basically try to find evidence. Do you have really good evidence that you are good at this thing? Or are there things that you need to be good at that you don't have good evidence for yet? And so here's where I landed on it. So there's like a couple of traits that I would say are really important to performing well at my job. So like one is being able to explain ideas, like concepts, in a way that most people can grasp. To take complex ideas and make them simple and approachable. Another is like you have to be able to put in a certain amount of effort. Like willingness to expend energy is definitely part of being successful in this career. But there's others too, like being able to build an audience and being able to sort of quote unquote sell online. Like how do you get people kind of on your bandwagon online? And what I basically did was I rounded them all up, and then I said to myself, okay, which of these do I have concrete evidence that I'm extremely good at? And which of these do I not have evidence for yet? And I framed it that way specifically because there are some things that I feel I might be good at, but I don't necessarily have the evidence for them yet. And I don't want to lump them in and say, I'm not good at these things. What I want to say is, I don't yet have the measurable evidence to prove that I'm good at these things. So I'm going to go find that evidence next. So the things that I have like I have measurable proof that I'm good at selling in person, that I'm good at like breaking down ideas, making them simple and approachable, and that I can put in a ton of effort, like when it matters. I have plenty of evidence that those things are true, like zero confidence issues when it comes to those three things. The things that I do not yet have satisfactory proof of, these are the three that I came away with that I want to work on. One is selling online. When I think about, like, I've sold stuff. I've run entire businesses that were completely remote. But when I think about the most important sales that I've ever done, or like selling that I've ever done, it's primarily some version of this. Like face to face, I can talk to somebody. Related to that would be like growing an audience. And I got to create some benchmarks there. But specifically, I have not had to grow audiences from like the 0 to 10,000 mark. In my job, I came into a pre-existing audience, which was helpful. And then in my businesses before that, I didn't need like an audience per se. I needed 1 or 2 clients, in order to make money at any given point in time. So that's not like an audience building need. So I don't have evidence for those two yet. And then the last one is consistency. So this is probably like a gray area. I could probably find evidence that I'm like a consistent person. But in general, I tend to find success by like putting in huge amounts of effort over a short period of time, pushing the boulder like over the finish line and then not touching it again forever. And I think what I want to develop is more examples of times when I've been just very consistent with sort of like low to medium amounts of effort. So that's the exercise that I went through over the course of the week. Hatchet to you. This is something I still think about. I think I'm going to think about for a while. What's your take on that as I kind of talk you through that exercise?
Yeah. First off, that is so cool that you did that, man. And I really mean that. That is so cool. I have a few things to say about this. One of them will be specific, tactful, and the other one is a little bit more big picture thinking, which is something that I think about a lot. The tactful piece is you may not realize it, but the most important thing that you said is you looked at it. And I think this is the deal that people miss, where they think being a fraud is the same thing as failing, and it's not. So if you read my article, this was another one of these articles that took me a long time to write, man. And this podcast is really helping me, and I swear it's almost like coming together really well. I'm feeling good about it. Like some of my best work is coming out. And the example that I use is, let's say that you're trying to run a 5K race if you've never run before, and you practice and you train and you come in last place. Like, are you a fraud? It's like, no, of course not, because you aimed at finishing a race. It has nothing to do with like hitting a goal or failing or even succeeding. It's just the mere act of having a target that you're looking at makes it so that like, even if you hit the target or not, you're going to be closer. Like you're going to be on the right path. You're going to be floating down the river, which is going to take you to the correct delta, So yeah, like you nailed it, man. You nailed it. You totally got it. And like imposter syndrome isn't about winning and losing and failing. It's about that feeling where, again, if you read my article, you're just saying like, hey, what can I help you with? Hey boss, can I knock on your door? What's going on? What can I do for you today? Where pros like don't need to do that. They really don't, because they just know, like, I'm on the right path. And I know I'm on the right path because I'm looking right at it. Like, you're quite literally looking at the finish line. So it's like for me, a mental exercise of calibration much more than it's a mental exercise of success or failure. Okay. That's my tactical part of it. Go ahead. What do you got?
Can I just pause? I wanna read. There were two lines from the piece that really stood out to me. I think you encapsulated both those ideas that you just shared really well inside this article. And I want to just read them to double down and drive home this concept for people who
It's really important.
be jiving with this right now. So,
but it's like, it's not about beating yourself up. That's like the important part. Being a pro doesn't mean you're beating the shit out of yourself all the time. It just means that you're looking in the right direction. So I'm glad that you're nailing this home, because it's important.
Totally. And I think the reason that this originally kind of grabbed my attention was because when you said it the first time, there was something about it that just seemed like such a relief, because the way you put it last week was like, once you are focused on the one thing, it's like the confidence just kind of builds itself, and you don't have to worry about it anymore. Like because you know where you stand. And there's something about that just resonates so true from other arenas. Like I don't feel like a fraud when it comes to, say, like trail running, right?
Mm-hmm.
We just talked about that. That's one of my favorite things to do. I know I'm not the best, but I also know that like I put the time in and I feel like I perform there the way that I want to perform at this stage in whatever my journey is there.
Yes.
And it's like, what you're talking about is when you look straight at the thing, you may not be there. You may not even be where you want to be, but you're putting in the work to get there. And that is what creates the confidence. It's not necessarily, it may not even be being the best. Once you are really super confident that the numbers show that you're the best, yeah, I would agree. Probably another dose of confidence comes from that. But there's something about just showing up to put in the work that will quiet a lot of those demons in your mind. So there's two things in here that you say. One is the reason you may feel like a fraud is because you never picked a specific aim and measured your success directly against what matters most. This is the thing that we've talked about this a couple of times. And that was so interesting for me to read, because what it gets me thinking about is like, I'm not even sure I can encapsulate this well in words. It's like that noise that goes on in your mind where you're telling yourself, "Oh, I don't know if I belong here. I don't know if I deserve this." What that really is too much space.
Yes.
It's too much.
It feels so good to hear you get this. Really, it really does.
Well, I hope other people benefit from this too, because this whole framing of this, this is going to be one of those 5 big ideas I'll take out of this year, I think. But what it is, it's like too much space, and you like lacking a specific measure, a specific goal creates all this space for other ideas to move in, other ideas of what could be important. And without taking the time to really purposefully review them, your mind kind of like hops from one to the next, to the next, to the next, to the next, like you're swinging through the jungle on vines, just kind of grabbing at stuff. And you're not really sure if you're doing the thing, And as you said now multiple times, just stopping to get a really clear look at what is the thing, it quiets all that and it fills up all that space, because now there's not a bunch of extra stuff creeping in that might be important. There's the thing, and then there's your gauge of whether or not you're putting in the work to do it. And I think there's plenty of examples. I mentioned consistency is one thing for me that I want to get better at. It's not enough just to know what that one thing is, right? You got to put the work in. Those two aspects are what is going to create confidence, I think, in a lot of cases. There's one quick other note that I would just say about the article for people who haven't checked it out yet. You should go check it out, because the other thing that I like that you did is you laid out the measurable goals for like the 4 main areas of your life, or at least your like business/fitness. Again, I think there's 2 things that are interesting about this. The first is sort of obvious, which is that a lot of people don't typically take the time to do this. Again, creates that space. But the other is that some of these goals are a little counterintuitive. And yeah, by setting counterintuitive goals, like you've set the game up so that you can win it, which I think is another really interesting thing. Most people never take the time to think through. They'll use the same metrics that most people use. And if you compete like in the same game on the same metrics as a whole bunch of people who are way ahead of you, yeah, you're always going to feel way behind. And you may not even build the type of life that you actually want to live. So I like that section. But the other quote that really grabbed me was, instead of being helpful, focus on being valuable. And that whole section is worth a read for people who maybe feel similar. Like I'm kind of a people pleaser. I try not to be, and people tell me I do a good job of like creating boundaries around my time, but I don't feel like I'm very good at it. I feel like I take on things, like I'm quicker to sacrifice something that I want to do for something that comes up for somebody else. And I'm always trying to get a little better at that side of it. So rather than being helpful, be valuable. I think that's such an interesting framing for somebody, especially if you have a job, like a capital J job, and you're taking a paycheck.
Yeah, and I went through both examples of being a job and being an entrepreneur, but I would say it's easier to relate to if you have a job, but I would say it's just as relevant whether you work for yourself or you work for somebody else, because if you're valuable, nobody cares if you're helpful or not. I don't know. It's an easy layup, but I guess Warren Buffett, something like that, is the best example. Like nobody's ever gonna call Warren Buffett. It's like, hey, you didn't send me the things that I wanted in the right order that you wanted. Like, he probably wouldn't even answer the phone, right? Like, nobody cares if he's helpful. And yeah, that's really cool that you notice that, because my wife actually really helped me with this. I didn't know how to end it because I didn't want to say the same thing over and over again just to have like a conclusion. There's sometimes I think to myself, do I need to just push this person off the cliff with how I end it? But I did want to drive the point home because being helpful is easy and painful in the same way that like being a couch potato is easy and painful. But being valuable is also painful and easier. And so no matter what you do, it's going to suck. And that's just the reality of it. And having that courage to actually look at the thing and just be like, it's so scary, man. Like I remember it so well when I would get these emails from clients and just like that feeling like, oh no, this person's mad at me. This person's mad at me. I didn't even open the fucking email yet. You know what I mean? I just like assumed that I did something to upset somebody, and I hated it. I'm an anxious person to begin with. I got way too much nervous energy. Like I'm definitely a people pleaser. I want people to like me. I don't necessarily need to please people. I just want people to like me, you know? And it just wasn't until I I don't want to say I built up the courage. It was kind of a blessing. Like it was gifted to me. You know, it was like the pain of staying the same was worse than the pain of changing type deal, you know? And it just happened. I was like, okay, from now on, I'm just gonna look at the thing and I don't want to feel like this anymore. And if I fail, then I fail. But at least I know that I'm going in the right direction. Because if I stay looking at the thing, if I fall, it's fine. You just keep moving in that direction.
Okay, so I think we should maybe round up this conversation by giving people some actionable ways that they can do both of these things, that they can identify what the thing is.
Yeah.
And also, I guess tied in with that is understanding how to differentiate between being helpful and being valuable across different domains. Because I think there obviously what counts as valuable would change from industry to industry, but there are probably some core concepts that transfer across all of them. So let me see if I can throw some questions at you. I'm just going to throw a couple at you, and we'll see what happens. But I want to think through this from a few different angles. So one would be like, I'm curious to know how you think through finding what the thing is in a domain where you may not be as familiar, because you've been running an agency now for a long time. It took a little while to kind of figure out that phone calls was the thing for you guys, but now you're pretty confident about that. So like hypothetically, let's say you were to buy a new business, and I don't know if you want me to give you a business or if you prefer to just, if you maybe you've already been through this recently, but like you parachute into a new business that you don't know as well as the one you're running now. What are some of the ways that you'd go about cutting the line and just figuring out what that one thing is so that you don't have to go through this learning experience all over again?
Yeah, really interesting. This would be a fun conversation to bounce back and forth. I suppose I would do like signal versus noise exercises. I would probably even list them out where I would just quite literally list the different things that I could aim at and go through them line by line to figure out, is this signal or is this noise? For instance, let's say, I don't know why this is always the example that pops in my head every time this happens. Maybe I just think it's like a cool business that I'd like to run one day. But let's say somebody gifts me like a landscaping company, and there's a ton of different things I could think of, right? Maybe I could think of how many lawns did I cut? How many trucks do I have? What my revenue was, what my profits was, right? And me personally would list all of these things out until I got to the real signal. And I think off the top of my head, again, I wouldn't do the exercise, but I think in a business like that, the real signal would be how many people referred me. If I could get my referrals up to the point where I just know that if you get your referrals up in a business like that, nothing else really matters. You don't have to do anything. You don't have to advertise. You don't have to stress about revenues or profits. Like you know that your work speaks for itself, because the more referrals you get, the more referrals you get. Like it's like a Price's Law type thing where like the more you win, the more chance you have of winning. So might not be the most relatable example for people that deal online, but for me, I would break that thing down to think like, if I had this one thing, what is the one thing that would make everything else so much more valuable? I think that's a good way to wrap it up, actually. I'll say that again. What is one thing that I could have that would make everything else more valuable?
That is an interesting way of doing it. Yeah. There's a question that Tim Ferriss talks about a lot that I like, which is like you lay out the tasks that you have for a day, and then you can look at all of them and ask a similar filter question, which is which of these makes the others easier or obsolete?
Yeah. Exactly.
And I wonder if there's something to that as well. Like you said, list out every function of the business, or maybe even just every function of growing the business. That's a tough one though, especially because in one of those businesses, you can get bogged down really quickly with like customer service stuff. Maybe that's a good way. Yeah, maybe that is a good way of picking the right metric. And then from there, you kind of have to decide, well, how does that metric turn into action? Like, what do you actually spend your day on? How would you think through that? Because I could think of a few ways. I like this concept of focusing on referrals because it is very clarifying, right? Like that's going to affect your customer service, right? Are we serving the customers to a level where they're happy to recommend us?
Yeah.
It's also going to affect things like your sort of self-determined action. Like, are you asking for referrals? That's a really important thing to do.
Yes.
If referrals are the main thing. I'm not sure how it would impact guys on the ground or like some of the other minutiae, like, I guess it does. It kind of touches everything.
Yeah, it would. Sure. It would determine who I would hire. It would even determine just like the conversations I have with those people. So I guess relating it again to Stodzy is easy because that idea just gets repeated over and over and over and over again. So in a way, like I would have something to report back to them as well. And then really what I would do is I would incentivize my team for referrals too, because then that solves the principal agent problem, So it's like, yeah, you're working for me, but hey, everybody, look, if you get referrals, this means I don't have to spend money on advertising. This means that I have enough money to buy the better equipment, which is going to make your lives easier. I can get you uniforms so you don't have to pay for your own stuff, right? Get referrals. So what's that mean? It means do the best job possible. It means look presentable. It means say hi and knock on the door when you're done. Maybe leave a note. Anything else I can do for you? Like, here's a burner phone that I can give to customers with text messages to say like, hey, you forgot about this thing. Oh, no problem. I'll be right back. You know what I mean? Yeah. I mean, I think we're kind of doing it, right? I think you nailed it actually. Like it's the one thing that makes everything else easier or obsolete, because if I get referrals, I don't have to think about anything else other than getting referrals.
Okay. All right, I like this. Now, the second question, I'm going to flip the frame just a little bit, which is related to your point of like rather than being helpful, be valuable. Let's say you're hiring an employee in this situation, right? This lawn care business. How do you then determine whether or not they're valuable? I mean, the simple answer is like, do they create more referrals?
Yeah.
But just talk through that a little bit out loud as the prospective business owner. Like how would you categorize people as valuable? And specifically, what are some helpful things that they would not have to do for you if you considered them to be valuable? Like, do you have? I mean, you have a bunch of employees over at Stoddart. Obviously, they're all great, but is there anybody who comes to mind who is like valuable but not helpful? You don't have to say their name, but like, what are some of the things that they don't do that would be helpful, but you're okay with them not doing it because they're so valuable to the company?
My business partner, he's dreadful. He's my best friend, and he's completely dreadful. Like, he's a brat. He's like condescending. Like, he's not helpful at all. But if there is an invoice that needs to get paid, he latches onto it like a goddamn pit bull. And I never, ever, ever have to worry about our receivables. And that means all I ever think about is what we talked about a couple weeks ago, which is just bringing in new business. And it just happened today, right? Where you said, is this really the kind of thing where you get in a new client and you do your onboarding paperwork and then you hit send, and like, if I use the words new client into the general Slack channel, I created a bunch of zaps so that it emails everybody. It has to say new client exactly in all caps. And so then everybody gets the new client onboarding form, and then I'm done. And the invoicing paperwork is on there. It's all on there. And eventually it's going to lead down to where Saks has to chase money. And I am not chasing money. Like, I'm just not doing it. And so I love this kid so much. And so it sounds like I'm saying bad things about him. I would say it if he was right here. You know, like he's my brother. Yeah. He's my best friend. But there's like very few things that he's not at all concerned about making anybody's life easier. He's really not. He's concerned about operations, and he's concerned about getting the damn invoices paid. And it's the most valuable thing that he could ever do. And so I think that's a good example.
That's a great example. It's all interesting to think through. I think I've had examples of this as well. Like, I think a lot of people here are probably familiar with Trung Fan. He was on my team. Now he's off doing his own thing. But back when he was on our team, same thing, man. Creative genius. And he could crush work faster than anybody I know. I think it's partly because he came from a finance background. So like, you know, all those guys are, oh my God.
Yeah.
But he could you could send him like a 200-page PDF that was just published from some company and be like, hey, we want to do a summary of this. And he'd send it back 30 minutes later. Great summary, quotes, the whole 9 yards. Yeah. He's an incredible, he said incredible at like one thing, which is creating content that people love. Never on time for meetings. He didn't even go to meetings. And and everybody just accepted it, right? Because that's Trung, and he crushes at the one thing that is super valuable for his role. So I've seen this live too, and I think it's definitely something to think about. Now, let's talk about one more thing, which is for the people pleasers out there. What are some good tactics for unentangling yourself from all the yeses that you may have given out over time, right? Because people have been helpful for years now, and they're making the transition to being valuable. You obviously can't walk in Office Space style, like throw a dead trout on your boss's desk and be like, I'm only going to be valuable from now on. You know, so let's talk through that a little bit. How do you? I would imagine there's some kind of overlap that has to happen. Like if you've taken on a bunch of things and you want to shift to this sort of value-driven approach, you kind of need to finish delivering on the things that you've taken on.
Sure.
Or disentangle yourself in a way that's like a win-win for everybody.
Yeah. So actually, this is a good opportunity for me to talk about the bigger meaning with me personally and why it's been so helpful. There was a Jordan Peterson lecture that I listened to that had a lot of impact on me. And I realize Jordan Peterson's controversial. There's some things he says that I think are ridiculous. There's other things he says I think like, wow, this is very enlightening. And one of the lectures he gave was about humans and our very unique propensity to aim. And so that's why I use the word aim very, very, very specifically, because it's not even about hitting the target. It's about, like, in the same way that we have evolved to not stand out in the group, like the whole linchpin lizard brain conversation that we had, we've also evolved from our thinking, our emotions, and even like our eyesight and even how our bodies work to know exactly what it is that like we are focused on. If you look at your eyes, like quite literally inside of your eyes, it's your brain paints these pictures to make it seem like your vision is what's the word, like to the side of you, your peripheral vision. Is that it? Yeah. But in reality, like you're only ever looking at one very specific focal point at a time. It's the same reason why kids start throwing things at an early age. And this is a really interesting, like even the worldwide culture for cultures that if it was 10,000 years ago, didn't even know each other existed. We all celebrate this idea of having good aim. Like, what is basketball? If you think about it, like, how fucking stupid is that? Like, 80,000 people get into arena and we jump and yell and drink beer. It's like, oh my God, that person got a ball into a thing. So, like, universally, worldwide, we celebrate this concept of aim. And I thought about this lecture a lot, and I thought to myself, that's why when you said there's too much space, I thought like, yes, that's exactly it. There's too much space. And I think wrapping this up to actually get into your point, I have been there, because what do you do when you can do anything, right? Like, what do you do when you're in an endless room with just idea, opportunity, person to please, yes to give, right? What the hell do you do? And to untangle this web, this is almost like a perfect place because it comes back full circle to where we were at the beginning of the conversation. To untangle this web, like the first thing you have to do is just look at it, because that is so hard. It's so hard because it's just, not only is it easy emotionally, but just in the world we live in, it's very like there's not a lot of things standing in your way from just finding another thing to say like, hey, look, I did this. This is why I'm valuable. You're like, can't quite think of the word for it, but it's just practically easy to come up with shit to say like, this is my part in the tribe, you know?
Yeah.
So the first step for the people pleasers, for the people like me, for the people that keep looking at your project, thinking like, I don't know what I'm doing. I'm not good enough. You know, everybody else understands this secret that I don't understand. I might as well just quit, is just to pick something to look at and then just only look at that thing for however long. And then don't even think of it in success or failure. Just quite think of it as like, this is the one thing, because no matter what you do, if that's all you look at, you're going to end up in a better spot than if you were bouncing around all the space, like you said. So that's my long-winded metaphysical story about aim and specificity.
Pick it. Pick one thing. Measure it.
Yeah.
Right? It's got to be measurable. It's not enough to say, like, I'm going to focus on audience building. It's like, well, I'm going to measure this certain type of audience. Like you said, you're building a newsletter. You want to build a newsletter with a 40% open rate. And the open rate there is the thing you're measuring, because that's kind of like the indicator for the things that you care more about than just audience size. It's a huge audience. It's not opening your email. It doesn't mean anything, right? Mm-hmm. So pick something, measure it. And then one thing that's helped me recently, I've mentioned a couple of times, I've overcommitted, or I think I overcommitted at the beginning of the year. And a lot of those commitments sort of came to a head right around the last 4 to 6 weeks. You were feeling
cocky at the new year.
Like, yeah, exactly.
New year, new me. Woo!
Yeah. And so I just had to go all the way through getting things done, book again.
Yeah.
And just apply it step by step. And so I feel like there's some aspect of this too. It's like, pick the thing, look at the thing, in order to like offload the stuff that maybe you shouldn't be doing because it's helpful but not valuable.
Yep.
You really need to understand the full scope of what you're working on and what the priority of those projects are. And I think that's one of the muscles that I'm trying to strengthen is
Me too.
I'm kind of a taskmaster, and like it's just really easy for me to create a long to-do list during the day. And typically there's like one or two things that are on that list that are, probably related to what we're talking about, the thing that's valuable. And just getting better at committing to focusing on those rather than checking off as many things as possible. So it's a muscle too. There's a part of this that I think changes immediately as soon as you look at and measure and just be honest with yourself about what it is that's actually valuable in your organization. And then there's another aspect that is building the long-term capacity to say no and execute on say no to the rest and execute on the things that are actually important. And I think for what it's worth, I think that's something that you're constantly learning, because at every level in your career, those decisions get harder to make all over again. Like, it's super easy for me to say no to things that people used to ask me to do 10 years ago when I was first getting started in my career. But now the level of opportunity is different. And so this is something that I don't think people talk about, but like the difficulty of the no continues to go up as your career gets more developed and more interesting. And so you kind of always have to revisit that skill set, I think.
I totally agree. However, that's why I think this can be, I don't know, whatever the opposite of like a self-fulfilling prophecy is. Because if you establish yourself to that valuable benchmark, then there's actually nothing to say no to, because
people stop asking.
Yeah, exactly. And then the world opens up to you for the things that you've decided through your action that is where you want to be, right? We'll finish up on this actually, because I realized as you were talking about that, when you said getting things done, I realized this was a thing that was very helpful for me. Right about the same time, and I know it was about the same time because it was a couple of weeks before my back surgery, and I was just in like a really, really dark spot. So I'd go for walks every night and listen to these Jordan Peterson lectures, and they would like give me hope. And I had to take 2 weeks off of my business coach that I had back then, and she was a Tony Robbins based business coach, and she gave me this course. Well, she didn't give it to me, of course. I had to buy it, but it was called Time of Your Life. I can look it up, and I really, really mean it. If you're interested in like this exercise, it was very helpful. He didn't call it AIM. That's something that I just sort of come up with. He called it establishing your ultimate outcome. And I've written about it before, where once you know what your ultimate outcome is, it makes it very easy to make decisions, because you can bounce your decisions on, does this get me closer to or further away from my ultimate outcome? So they're like a little bit different, because Tony Robbins is, very much like, control your destiny, what's your ultimate outcome, and he gets really into it. He's I don't know, I don't need to explain the whole course, but if you want to just break that cast around your brain that is kind of keeping that muscle immobile, that no muscle immobile, then I would start with that course, man. Seriously, it really helped me. It's called Time of Your Life. It's all audio.
Yeah, I think I have it. So, people, really? I do. I got it. Oh no! Sorry, they gave me the taste. Robbins has got this new app called Breakthrough, which is like
and then
all his training, all his trainings on that. So I have one of his programs on there, which I really enjoy, and then it seems like you can get pretty much everything else. So I'll check it out. Time of Your Life. Time of Your Life,
I think it was called. Yeah, it really helped me.
I'll throw one more in because we're just given course recommendations. Steph Smith and Calvin Rosser came out with a course called How to Do Time Right, or Doing Time Right. Doing Time Right.
Nice. It's very on brand.
Yeah. It's probably similar to a lot of what else is out there in terms of the fundamentals, which are like understand everything that's going on inside your scope of time, and then kind of decide what can you eliminate, what can you delegate, what can you automate, and then what are you actually going to spend your time on. But what I really liked about their course was it was very, very hands-on. So they go kind of through their own email inboxes. It's a lot of like Loom videos to show you how they use email to automate things. And it was much more tactical than I think other time-based philosophies have been. But I'm going to check out this Robbins thing too, because he's the GOAT, you know?
Yeah, he's gimmicky, but he's definitely, his stuff has really helped me for real.
Yeah. I think his like marketing has become gimmicky, but his information was always just good. You know?
Always, for sure. And his books are good too. A couple of investing books obviously really helped me with my money and stuff like that. So
it's money master the game, right?
Excellent. Yeah, totally.
All right, people. Well, you heard it here first. Go figure out what the thing is. Let us know what you find out. Also, we got to shout out to Dylan, because Dylan from what's his newsletter? Creator.
He is doing such a good job, by the way. Dylan, if you're listening to this, I am so freaking impressed with what you're doing. I can't remember what it's
Growth
called.
Currency. It's Growth
Currency. Yeah. Shout out to Growth Currency.
Yeah. Oh, he passed me. He's got more followers than me now. So he's growing fast. Go check him out. He writes a newsletter for creators. Yep. And he was very kind to shout out the podcast recently. And then we had somebody else. I don't know who this is. Their username is Do a Trick, and their @ handle is Eat Yo Tots. But eat yo tots. Good life advice, and thanks for the shout out. Thanks, everybody. We'll talk to you next week.
All right, y'all. See you next week. Thank you.